You see, in the ever-evolving world of politics and governance, it sometimes seems as though reality is taking on a surreal and comedic twist. Such is the case with the recent news of Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu seeking approval for a substantial loan of $7.8 billion and 100 million euros. Now, this surprising turn of events comes mere hours after the president submitted a supplementary budget of 2.18 trillion naira. Now, don't forget, somewhere in there is allocation for luxury cars and other extravagant expenses like the renovation of the presidential villa and, of course, cars for the president, the wife of the president as well, the First Lady. Now, the request of the president was contained in a letter to the Senate, read during the plenary by the Senate President Godswill Akpabio. Anyways, joining us to have this conversation, I'm now joined in the studio by Azeez Lawal, Managing Director, Trustbanc Financial Group, joining from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you, Azeez Lawal.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon to you too. It's a pleasure. We also have Adewale Ajadi, a public affairs analyst, joining us from Abuja, Nigeria. Thank you so much, Adewale, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me on.
It's a pleasure. Now, Azeez, isn't it ludicrous? I mean, let's not take away the fact that the proposed budget largely considers the means to ease the difficulty that was specifically caused by the removal of subsidies. It means we're not all that delusional after all. But generally, what is your thought on, first of all, asking the Senate to approve a sum of money for, some expenditure that have raised eyebrows, and then eventually coming back to ask the same Senate to approve a loan that is quite outrageous as well? What do you think about it?
Yeah, thank you once again. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so, already the anchor for the loan, one of the justifications for the loan, or let's still stick with anchor, right, is the fact that it's been approved by the previous administration. So basically, this is the president coming to us to say that since we have this room, let's use it, right? But let's stick with their letter, right? In one of the justification they also made to the National Assembly is that this the loan is going to be used to fund projects and programs that have been selected based on their proposed or potential positive technical economic evaluations, but then we've not seen any specifics on this particular project. We've not seen these projects outlined specifically. It's what we've seen so far is more general statements that we have selected these projects based on their technical or economic potentials across the 36 states. So for now, based on the economic realities we are seeing, they are the only justification that we can see from the realities is more of to fortify the Naira and cushion the country's weak current balance of payments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Azeez Lawal, for that. Also, Adewale, how exactly? Azeez Lawal has mentioned that one of the justifications is the fact that it was already approved in the budget. But how will the president justify the need for such a massive loan when the nation is already burdened with a sustainable debt?
Well, I wouldn't start the way you have set it up, because I would start from the premise that there has to be a strategy. We are a developing economy. We're a developing country. Every time there's a need to borrow, is an investment. But the problem we have in this context is the problem as the president has not laid out his strategy clearly enough. The purpose of his governance, I don't think we can even lay this on the past government. The government has to articulate what his strategy is for developing Nigeria, not reacting to the conditions now, but in the longer term, what are the things that he wants to achieve? And let's be clear, what do we need? We need a productive capacity because we have a young population. We need the infrastructural capacity to ensure that that population is able to not just produce for the economy, but generate revenue for the state. The gap is always that in Nigeria, we're not overborrowed. There's no way we can look at our borrowing scale on GDP terms that is extremely high. But what are you borrowing for? And that's not clear in this letter, but should be made clear. This is what we want to borrow for. This is what we are trying to develop. This is what we need to see. The challenge that this government has is that the politics, governance, and development are in contradiction to itself. The government is a very political government. That makes sense. But it has to build on the diversification and the investment made prior. Nigeria is a long-term project, a complex project. You have to look at it longer term. You can't look at it on administration to administration. So, for example, let me give you one indicator. Nigeria's productivity increase in the past 20 years is the third in the African continent. That's remarkable. That never gets talked about. If we are investing for productivity, and we're investing for the capacity of the young people, we are mostly young people, the average age of Nigerians is 17, then let's do that. Let's be clear that's what we're doing, and let's be clear about how we're doing it. And then we can judge the government on the efficiency. The point about wasteful spending, that's an efficiency issue, not an effectiveness issue. We need to be clear about what is effective in the development of the Nigerian economy. And right now, it's not clear what is the politics, what's the economics, and what is the development. Well, the economics and the development are one and the same, or should be one and the same. So my concern is that the government has to articulate itself better and be clear about its short-term, medium, and longer-term goals, and not burden the past administration with why it's choosing this priority. It should choose this priority, only when it's consistent with its economic goals and its developmental goals.
All right, thank you so much, Adewale, Ajadi, for that. I mean, now we've made it clear that it's essential. Borrowing is part of the budget if we're going to achieve something as a nation. But isn't it going to be like pouring water in a basket? And this is for you, Azeez Lawal. If we are borrowing, but the funds at our disposal are not being utilized effectively or efficiently, like Adewale has deliberately clarified that they're two different things. But if the funds are not used well, what then is the essence of collecting these loans? Already there's this, it has created a sense of distrust, especially with Nigerians, seeing how funds are being allocated for things, trivial things that do not necessarily matter.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what happens? Typically, when you borrow and you don't commit them to productive projects, is that, unlike we've seen in the last few years, right? Typically, when you borrow, right, as long as you're committing it to productive projects, your revenue to debt servicing is supposed to shrink because revenue is expanding. Right, even though the cost of servicing those loans is expanding, but what we've seen in the past few years is the fact that we've seen a situation whereby the pace of the revenue expansion is far lower than the pace of the cost of servicing those loans. Right, so at some point Nigeria was 99. That's a revenue to debt servicing was around 99%. Currently, we are below 80%, which is good, right? But then even at that is, according to the last report of the Debt Management Office as of June, the DMO advised the government that at the current level of around 73%, then that it appears that the borrowing, so the continuous borrowing may not be sustainable. Right, so that's what happens. It's one of the implications of borrowing and not funding productive projects. If we are like it was mentioned earlier, right? If we are coming to borrow $7.8 billion, for example, you know that you're going to invest in projects that can not only can pay back, but should be able to earn dollars, right? Because you're using dollars to fund the project. They should be able to earn dollars that will repay those projects. But what we've seen in the past is where you even mismatch the borrowing currency, right? You're using dollars to fund Naira projects that and further worsen the situation of the country, right? So is one of the major implications, really. One of the major gaps that we've seen over the years is the fact that we borrow to fund projects that are not equally productive to match the burden of those debts. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Azeez, Lawal, for that. Also, Adewale, what measures would you say are being taken, especially by the government, to address the concerns of citizens who may fear the potential consequences of increased borrowing, especially with the condition that we're in as a nation currently?
With respect, I don't know what measures the government are taking at the moment, but let's be clear. Productivity or productive element of a project is not what we should be concerned about. That's micro. We need to start looking macro at the critical areas of our economy that increases our capacity, not only to make our people more productive, but also to generate revenue on the longer term, not just for the loan. It can't just be about loan. That's the micro aspect of it. Macro, we have to start developing the capacity of the average Nigerian, which is about 17 years old, to be creative, to be constructive, to be productive, and then create systems that allows them to consider and build trust with the government to be able to deliver revenue to government. The goal must be that government is funded through revenue and taxation from the citizens. That should be our goal. And that allows the government to invest capitally. Now, the point that I want to add to that is that we should not be funding for recurrent spending, not on those kinds of things. We should be borrowing for capital expenditure that, like was said, can either fund itself, but in the longer term, fund something that funds it. And we have to be very clear about that. And I think what you're pointing out quite legitimately is that government has to be more transparent and open about what it is doing. Right now, the government's messaging is extremely reactive. It needs to be more proactive. It needs to be able to speak in a language that people understand about the focus of governance, about the focus of development, about what legacy they want to put. I mean, and I'm not trying to compare. When the last government, there were 3 priorities. Everybody is clear about the 3 priorities, even if you disagree with what they did or did not do. Let's be clear about what the priorities of the government are. What are the strategic objectives we want to achieve? What is the short-term goals? What are the medium-term goals? What are the longer-term goals? That's slightly different from the politics, but it's important to manage that. Then you manage the politics differently. But I think there's a mix-up. But let's not be too harsh on the government, because unfortunately, this is a very complex country, Nigeria, with about 372 ethnic groups, 36 states, layers of local government, state government, and federal government, all with different priorities. They've never been properly managed in the sense of us knowing with wisdom how to relate those things. And that's not down to individual governments, but it's across the board structurally. So we need to think about that. And so we come back to issue of loans. Let's be clear what our borrowing goals are. Let's be clear about what our borrowing ceiling is. And let's be clear about what we are trying to achieve with borrowing. We cannot borrow money and then start justifying later. We need to say, this is all the goals of this government. This is where we are finding money. This is the money we have, and this is money we are finding to be able to deliver those goals. And this is how we want you to judge how we have been doing what we are doing. And those are the things that they're simple to talk about on television. They're complex to implement, but they're extremely important to try to do.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ajadi, for that. Also, Azeez, so say that we borrow the money. What exactly are the potential short-term and long-term implications of the loan on the country's economy? Because most times when countries are borrowing, they have to be careful so that, there is a proper repayment plan and we don't run short. What exactly is the impact that it will have on the economy of a country? Azeez?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. I mean, for impact, typically borrowing impact burden on the government, right? particularly interest. In this case, it's international, right? But typically, locally, you come and battle interest rates. When governments borrow like this, most of the time you are dealing with cost of funding, because it puts pressure on the other parties you are competing with in terms of funding. So in the short term, we expect interest rates to go up, like we've seen recently. That the government is, I mean, as a yesterday, for example, there was another UMO auction in the market, right, where the government came to where the central bank came to mop up to 300 billion naira from the system, right, and borrowing at the short end over 17%, with an approximate yield of 22% thereabout in the short term, right? Yeah, but that's by the way for generally, particularly for this in this case, right? The short-term implication are kind of beneficial, positive, to provide liquidity for the FX market and strengthen the Naira, which in turn should ease inflation, right? But long term, it will expand the country's debt burden if the funds are not properly channeled, like Mr. Ajadi has mentioned severally, right? But the good thing is that, I mean, that short-term pressure that we've seen, that pressure that we've seen on the Naira in recent weeks, it will ease it significantly, and possibly go below 1,000 Naira. That's one almost certain short-term benefits that we're going to see, but long-term implication is a problem this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Azeez Lawal. Also, this is for Adewale Ajadi. Now, looking at the borrowing as well, right, how exactly will this loan impact Nigeria's credit rating and ability to attract foreign investment in the future, seen as how the foreign direct investment is key on the agenda of the new administration? Is this going to affect us in any way when it comes to attracting foreign investment?
Well, to be honest with you, that indicator of foreign direct investment is a red herring, unfortunately. Let's be clear what we are talking about. Firstly, let's be clear. Is the government is 7 billion or whatever, sorry, 7.9 billion, the same as the money that the Minister of Finance talked about, nearly 10 billion that he's borrowing? Let's get some alignment about the facts about whether this is the same thing or we are talking about borrowing excess of 17 billion with the 7.9 billion, 7 billion, 3 billion that I was talking about before, and the 7.9 billion and 100. We need to know what this is. Then the second part is really that when investors are looking in, they should be looking at how is the economy run? Is there good housekeeping in the economy? Can they get their return on their investment clearly enough and easily enough? And the problem with that is that when we saw in the 80s, this is a game because there are geopolitical interests that would divest themselves at a drop of an hat. We even saw it in the 90s and the early 2000s. These investors would stop investing at the drop of anything that gives them reason to panic. And there's always reason to panic. So we have to look at our investment house and set it out so that our own investment sources are more stable, are more longer term, and are more interested in the development of the country. And the central issue is the development capacity that we create in the country. When we look at things like dollar, Naira indicator, they only matter because we're exporting at this level that we're exporting. If we are producing, if we are import-export focused and we are producing, then we would really see that the drop of the Naira is quite a blessing to us rather than a curse. So it is really about government priorities again. The government actually has to lay out its strategy. We have to be clear about what race we are running, what is important, why those things are significant. Right now, everything looks alike. They came in with an idea. That idea is being challenged by reality inevitably, and they are trying to adjust themselves as they go along. And one of the critical issues is Nigerian administrations have to see themselves as a continuum of each other, no matter what the politics dictates. it is extremely dangerous for a developing country like us to invest in diversification of the economy in the past 8 years and then come now and drop it for importation and everything must go trading economy in the next stage. So it is really about, those are also things investors will look at. What is the context like? What is the operating context like? Is policy consistent? Is change in government means a change completely? I mean, whilst denying what your predecessor does is good politics, it's not good economics. It's not really good practice in terms of development either. So we need to be able to connect the tissue and be able to walk and chew gum at the same time on many of these issues.
Okay. Adewale Ajadi, Public Affairs Analyst in Abuja, Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Also, Azeez Lawal, Managing Director, Trustbanc Financial Group, joining us from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being a part of this show.
Thank you.